My husband worked nights, so I'd be alone in a huge house. One night I go into the kitchen to make some tea, and I look outside to see the moon, and there's a face on the other side of the window. I scream, and it wakes up my aging husky who starts to howl. The guy bolts. I call the cops and wait forever locked in my pantry. The next day, my husband and I ride on horseback our whole property. We find a small makeshift cabin on our northwest corner. We find stuff stolen from our laundry line and canned stuff from our kitchen. He had pinned up selfies in the cabin he had taken while in our bed and sitting at our daughter's child-sized dinner table. When we first moved in here, I kept thinking I'd hear someone walking in the house while I was alone. It's a flood zone, so the house is on stilts, and you can hear footsteps when anyone walks across the floor. Of course, this is Texas, so I just grabbed my handgun and go see if someone had come in. Also, my mother-in-law has a key, and when she drops in and leaves things for the family, she sometimes won't relock the door. I kept feeling like I was going to walk into a room and someone would be there. Just feeling oddly watched all day for a few days. My husband didn't think anything of it, and one night he jumped out of bed, grabbed his handgun, and started going through the house, slamming all of the doors wide open. He said he'd heard banging in the kitchen, like someone was going through the pantry. He was adamant he had heard someone, but nothing. Doors still locked. My niece got home from her grandmother's house a few nights later, asked if she could sleep on the cot in our room. She's a teenager, not a small kid, so I asked her what was wrong. She didn't want to tell us because we wouldn't believe her, just that she didn't want to be alone. She said she'd heard banging in the kitchen, and when she'd heard that or felt like someone was in the house, she would see a man in the window of her room. We let her stay, and the next day we were all a little uneasy. My husband, a notorious non-believer in the paranormal, came in looking shaken and said he'd had closed her door after bringing in her laundry into the room, and a man had been smiling at him in the window. The windows on the house are almost 20 feet in the air because of the stilts the house sits on. I grew up in the middle of the woods in Louisiana. Our closest neighbor was 20 miles away. Our house was on a hill, and at the bottom was the creek that went through the woods for miles and miles. My grandfather would always tell us there were people living in the woods. Crazy inbred folks. On some the hills have eyes type shit, but I always assumed he was just trying to creep us out. So one night when I was like 8 years old, I sat in the living room watching Pearl Harbor. My father comes into the living room and tells us not to move, that he'd heard footsteps, and the back door slammed shut on his way to the bathroom. He thinks someone was in the house, and that he scared them off when he walked down the hallway to the bathroom. So he leaves the house, leaving the front door wide open, which scared the crap out of me. I paused the movie and just listened to silence for a couple of minutes. And of course, the guy is still inside. I'm staring out of the doorway to the living room. I see the top of a head peek around the corner, a head with a white sheet over it, cut and tied at the neck. I'm paralyzed, and even if I wanted to run, there would be nowhere to go but towards this creepy ass dude. He just stares at me for what feels like forever before he leaves towards the back of the house. The back door slams again. I just sit there and start crying until my father comes back in. My dad tells me that as he rounded the corner to the back of the house, he caught the guy leaving out of the back door. The guy sees my dad and books it down the hill. Then there's a gunshot. According to my father, my grandfather had been sitting on his porch next door and saw the guy walking toward our house. So he grabbed his gun, got back outside in time to see the guy running down the hill, and shot the dude in the leg. The guy fell, then got back up again before my grandfather could take another shot, and he disappeared into the woods. By that time, the cops showed up. The guy is gone. They search but can't find him. They do find a rundown sort of shack a mile or so into the woods, filled with nothing but pots and pans. So that was really weird.